Good evening. I'm Isaac Ben Ezra, host and co-producer of Conversations. A few weeks ago, I contacted both candidates for school committee regarding the election on Tuesday the 29th and asked them if they would be guests, and they both consented. Much has happened since that first interview, and upon learning of Kathy Sanderson's decision not to run, I sent her the following email. Catherine, I look forward to a conversation with you on Thursday as planned. Your decision to step away from another election challenge does not diminish your service in our community. It reflects the courage to balance our lives and find other ways open to us to make a difference. Sincerely, Isaac. And her response was, I'm always glad to talk about public schools, so I'd be delighted to still do the interview this Thursday at 1:30. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
A lot has happened.
A lot has happened.
Let's hear from you.
Sure. So I had given a lot of thought to whether I would run again or not, and I did decide in January that I was up for trying to do another 3-year term, and I was excited and invigorated about that. And a number of events have happened over the last week or two that made me really sort of take a step back and reflect on that decision. And after a tremendous amount of thought and conversation with family and close friends, I decided late Monday night that I would not seek re-election, and therefore made my choice and announced that on Tuesday. I will say that one of the things that I weighed back and forth on Monday when I was talking to people was I really wanted to campaign for 6 weeks, and I wanted to campaign for 6 weeks because I like conversation about public education. I like conversation in the newspaper, on ACTV, at debates, and interviews, on blogs, etc. I think it's really important that we as a community talk about our public schools, talk about public education, talk about our values, our visions, the direction, etc. And when I was weighing whether or not to run, one of the things that really saddened me was that my not running meant there wouldn't be a race, and that meant there wouldn't be candidates talking at League of Women Voters. I assumed that meant there wouldn't be candidates talking to you, there wouldn't be profiles in the paper and things like that. So I was frankly delighted to receive your email on Tuesday, still giving me this opportunity to talk with you and the broader community about public schools in Amherst, and that actually makes me feel even better about my decision, because I'm glad that there will at least be some continuing discussion, debate that you're providing for the community of Amherst to talk about that. So I really appreciate it.
Sandy, there's more than one way to serve the community.
Yes.
And a lot of us who've been in public service have found out that sometimes being on the sidelines is more effective than being in the limitations of the organization. Of course, it requires a lot of discipline. It's easier to speak out from the outside, but when you're sitting at the table and you have to make the tough decisions, it doesn't always come out so well.
It certainly is a very different role, and I had been involved in the public schools in different ways prior to serving on school committee, and then I sort of had a new role, and I frankly look back to stepping away from my current role and being involved in some new role, and that I think will sort of take form and take shape as the weeks and months go by, and I think about how I'd like to be involved. I certainly have a strong and deep commitment to public education in general. I have, a real fondness and commitment for public education in Amherst, and I certainly would like to stay involved. And I've had conversations today with one parent who's working on issues in math in our public schools. I've talked with Irv Rhodes this morning already about how I can be involved in the future, and his real hope that I choose to do so. And I look forward to seeing how it feels comfortable for me to serve in a new capacity post March 29th.
Meanwhile, you have a very difficult task of spending more time with your family.
Yes,
Tell me about that. Is that a tough decision?
Well, I've got to say that my husband said to me, as I think was quoted in the paper, that if you choose to run for re-election, you need to find a divorce lawyer. And then as I kind of weighed, I was thinking it's going to be hard to date as a single parent with 3 kids and on the school committee. So, so I certainly look forward to spending some more time with my spouse, certainly look forward to spending Tuesday nights with him. And I look forward to being able to spend more time with my kids. I'm staring down next week on school committee. We actually have meetings Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights. And, you know, I've got a 6-year-old. I've got a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And, you know, it's hard for mom not to be home at bedtime, you know, for those kids, those 3 nights. And it's hard on my spouse. And I am looking forward to being able to have more evenings that are free.
And this is precisely what the public needs to hear in terms of whatever the difficulties and the problems that arise when you're in public office, that you give up a lot. This is not a well-paying job.
That is true.
But the benefits, tell us about the benefits of being on the board.
Well, I mean, to me, I have really treasured the time that I've been on the board. So it's obviously been hard, and, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's been hard. But I think it's been really good in a couple of different ways. So one, when I look back at the 3 years that I've served, I really feel like I made a difference. And when I ran 3 years ago, I said to the voters in Amherst, you should elect me if you want me to get things done, because I get things done. And if you don't really want to get things done, don't elect me, because if I get on, I'm going to get things done. And for people who know me, I get things done. And I will say it's clear I'm not a politician. I'm a horrible, horrible politician, and I'm sure everybody in Amherst resonates with that view. But I'm pretty good at getting things done. And when I look at the 3 years that I've been on, I'm really proud. I know closing Marks Meadow was a really difficult decision, and I know it was hurtful for some families. But when I look at the budget states that we're in, and I look at the compromises we would have had to make in terms of educating all kids, keeping a 4th school open, I am 100% confident it was the right decision. I believe that the redistricting effort that resulted from that was extremely important. We had been clustering low-income kids at one school and really had sort of a poor school and 3 wealthier schools, and I think it's really good we solved that. I look at the addition of the Spanish language program in the elementary schools, which the community had asked for a decade. I look at the policies that we developed in terms of evaluating our instruction. I look at the important outside reviews that occurred during my time of special education, of math, of the middle school. And so when I look at the schools now versus when I arrived, I see really important, valuable changes that benefit kids. And I'm really proud to have worked collaboratively with a number of different superintendents and a number of different school committee members on the Amherst and regional level to have made those changes. I feel really, really good about that.
Let's talk about the bigger picture now. This is all in the context of diminishing resources and the terrible, difficult decisions and its impact on not only the whole educational process, but its impact on each child. What are we going to do about that?
Well, so I've been pretty vocal about trying to understand how money is spent in our schools. And I think that's really something we need to have a lot of work on. A Citizens Budget Advisory Committee headed by Allison Donta-Venman last year found that there were a lot of questions that they didn't really receive answers on in terms of why we spend so much. And the Amherst Public Schools spend a lot more than do other area schools. We have higher salaries at the administrative level. We have higher salaries at the teacher level. We have more administrators. And, you know, I think we really need to think about how we are allocating resources. I think there are really important questions to ask about how we choose to spend the resources that we have. And I think that's something that the superintendent and the school board are really going to need to think about moving forward. Budgets are clearly tight, but the other thing that's happening in the Amherst elementary schools in particular, but the regional schools as well, is that we're seeing far, far fewer kids enrolled in our schools. So if you look at the number of kids enrolled in the elementary schools right now, it's 99 kids fewer than were enrolled in our schools last year. So 99 kids in a single year, we've experienced that drop. And the reality is when you have fewer kids, you need fewer teachers. You need fewer intervention teachers. You need fewer classroom teachers. And so I think the real struggle for the schools moving forward is going to be figuring out how do you provide in the scope of diminishing population? Because when you have a diminishing population, you frankly have to make more difficult choices. We saw at the regional schools during my time on the committee a similar pretty big drop, and that meant that at the regional middle school and high school level, we were no longer able to offer 6 world languages, that it just became untenable to offer 6 world languages in the scope of a declining enrollment. We didn't have enough kids to be in the low enrollment languages, Russian and German. So if the school population is a lot bigger, more children are going to choose Russian and German, but we were down to something like 5 kids a year choosing Russian or 5 kids a year choosing German, and then the resources just don't make sense anymore in terms of allocating a teacher to those subjects. So I think a real question moving forward is, how do we either bolster our enrollment, which I think we need to talk about, or how do we try to allocate things in the scope of a diminishing student population in which it's harder to do it all?
Isn't it true that a population in our schools are changing and the needs are greater than they ever were?
Yes, and that is particularly
so that
true.
is that then is a challenge. You may have less students, but you have tremendous responsibilities, and we now have kids who speak 42 different languages.
Right. Well, and at the elementary school level in particular, what you're seeing is our students are increasingly low income. And there's been a dramatic shift. So if you look at 10 years ago in our elementary schools, the Amherst elementary schools, 24% of the kids were on free and reduced lunch. So 24% on free and reduced lunch 10 years ago. Currently this year, it's 37%. So it's climbed from 24% to 37% in a decade. And we just received numbers 2 weeks ago at school committee showing that in the current kindergarten class, it's 50% kids on free and reduced lunch. So we are really looking at 2 things going on, as you note. 1, we have a declining enrollment, and 2, we have an increasing population of low-income kids who are going to have particular needs in terms of providing intervention support, in terms of providing resources, in terms of funding things like field trips, or other kinds of assistance that is really going to be needed. And so I think that is going to be a challenge moving forward. How do we try to provide for what is a rapidly changing population, particularly at the elementary level?
A rapidly changing population in the midst of a rapidly changing economic environment.
Yes.
And the issues, particularly for children. Do we have homeless kids coming to our schools?
We certainly have homeless kids. We also have kids that are not homeless but are struggling with other things. So prior to my service on school committee, I was the president of the Fort River Parent Council, and I remember teachers and guidance counselors coming to the parent council and saying, we have a family who cannot provide a winter coat or snow pants for their child in the school. And of course in Massachusetts, that's not a subtle luxury, a coat or snow pants. We had guidance counselors coming and saying this family had their electricity turned off and no longer has heat, or no longer has hot water for bathing or doing dishes. So we also were in a situation in which there were families, and there are families still at all the schools, in which they have trouble providing a nourishing breakfast for kids to eat before they come to school. And so kids can eat breakfast at school, but then if you think about what happens when we have all these snow days, or what happens when it's winter, we're looking at not next week but the week after, winter vacation week, in which there's a whole week in which kids aren't coming to school and getting their free breakfast and their free lunch. So there are real challenges.
And where will the resources come from in order to meet those challenges?
So I think there are a number of different answers to that question. So I think one level is really about the town of Amherst. One level is about the town of Amherst and what the town of Amherst wants to do in terms of supporting kids, in terms of providing resources. I think one answer is in terms of the state and what kind of state aid is available for kids in this situation. I think the other issue is that we need to have resources at all of the elementary schools, and it really is much more of an element. It's not a non-existent problem at the regional level, but it's a much more acute problem at the elementary level because, frankly, the population of Amherst is very different than the population of Pelham, Shutesbury, and Leverett in terms of these kinds of needs. I think one thing that I've worked on in school committee, and I really hope can continue, is providing a more expansive preschool program. So this year, for the first time, and this was under the direction of last year's Amherst School Committee and former Superintendent Dr. Alberto Rodriguez, we started a preschool class entirely for low-income kids. So a preschool class offered simply for kids who are low income, who are less likely to be able to afford preschool on their own, as many middle and upper class children have that advantage prior to coming to school. That's really important in terms of giving these kids a head start when they enter kindergarten, but it also provides breakfast and lunch for these kids, and it provides them with a safe place to be during the day. And so I really hope that we can see an expansion of the preschool program so that all low-income kids in Amherst who want to have preschool and all families who want to have that option for their kids do have that available.
Tell me about the dropout rate and what's been the history in our schools. Are we moving in the right direction?
The dropout rate in the high school is relatively small. We don't have a particularly, major dropout rate, but what I guess I would find most concerning, and this is sort of coupled with a few other factors, is what you see is that the kids who drop out are increasingly likely to be kids of color and low-income kids. So it's not that all kids are equally likely to drop out. And so although the Amherst schools have a strong commitment to social justice, a strong commitment to multiculturalism, what you see, and you can see it in elementary school MCAS scores, you can see it in middle school and high school, percentage of kids in honors classes or 8th grade honors, you can see it in terms of dropout rates, is that the school system as a whole looks good, but if you look at subgroups or subpopulations, kids of color, Latino kids in particular, low-income kids in particular, you see lower rates of proficiency on MCAS, you see lower rates of access to honors classes, 8th grade algebra, and you see higher rates of dropout. So I think one of the challenges also facing our schools in the future, and this was to be one of the features of my campaign, is thinking about systematically how are we meeting the needs of all kids.
That seems to be a good way to get back into the thing, the whole business, as a citizen. What are we doing right now?
In terms of reaching all kids?
Yeah, I mean, we've been studying this thing to death over a long time. What are we doing? See, when I asked you earlier about resources and that we're not on an island, we're subject to the cuts, not only at the state level, but we seem to, education is a commitment in words only at the federal level. But we're losing our generations, and we're not only, we're Amherst, but we can't ignore the fact that we live in the valley. We've got Holyoke, we've got Springfield, we've got white and black and Latino kids during this period. We're losing. We're going to lose this generation. And it seems to me that we got to step up to the plate, and now I'll wear my advocate's hat, and we'll do it together.
And I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think, to me, I think that there are certainly things that involve resources. There are certainly things that involve resources. I think also there are things that we could learn by looking at other communities that have solved this problem. So I think there are other communities, and frankly you see this a lot in charter schools that have been highly successful at increasing rates of performance in low-income kids, at increasing rates of performance in students of color. And so to me, and this was sort of a theme of mine throughout my time on the school committee, I think we really need to look to communities that have tackled this issue successfully. So look at communities that have successfully raised achievement in these student populations in which we are not necessarily having success. I have been concerned about the elementary math curriculum that we use in Amherst. It's a curriculum called Investigations, and Investigations is a very language-dependent curriculum. We've heard this from teachers, we've heard this from outside experts, and there is some research suggesting that because this is a math curriculum that involves so much focus on verbal ability, on reading ability, it doesn't work particularly well in school districts that have a fairly high population, as you alluded to earlier, of students who may not speak English at home or for whom English is not their first language. So I think part of it is also looking at what are we doing in our schools in a systematic, programmatic way in terms of curriculum, in terms of intervention, in terms of other kinds of support, and are we using best practices? Are we using evidence-based decision-making? Are we using curriculum and programs that have been demonstrated to be effective with students like ours in other populations? And that's something that I'm really hopeful that the school committee and the superintendent will consider in the upcoming year.
And that generates at least two questions.
Okay, only two.
One is the training of teachers. Just as we need to be efficient and proficient in math and other subjects, we also have to be able to deal with working with kids with problems in the schools. Not only the teacher in the classroom who is the identifier of a possible problem, but the resources to back up the teacher. That's one piece that requires resources. And the other issue is to talk about it in the community in a way that we bring the community into the process. And one of the things that worries me, and I'd love an answer from you because you had to deal with this issue very carefully and the changes, not only with the closing down of school, but shifting the
boundaries,
the Latino kids from one area, the Cambodian kids from another area, and they had support systems in place. Have we replaced that support system in the new system, or are we asking people to do twice as much to run from one school to another in order to try to provide those resources?
Right, that's a great question. So I think that the way that the superintendent has thought about it, in terms of providing support, has been that we need to be supporting all kids. So we need to be supporting Latino kids, we need to be supporting Cambodian kids, we need to be supporting low-income kids, we need to be supporting, et cetera. We need to be supporting all kids. And so I think the real focus this year has been on making sure that the supports are there in all of the buildings for all of the kids. And previously in the Amherst schools, we had given families the option of being clustered in a given school. But even prior to the redistricting, there were Latino kids at all of the schools.
Right.
That it was not the case that only Latino kids were at Crocker Farm. And there were Cambodian kids at all of the schools, not just Cambodian kids at Fort River. So I think that the real focus, and I applaud this focus, has been on saying that regardless of which school you attend, you need to be supported. There has been an effort this year also to do, which I think may be what you're referring to, affinity groups, to have an affinity group sort of after school program where students could choose to be involved in a culturally relevant group, Latino students or Cambodian students, et cetera. And I think those plans are still in progress in terms of making sure that students and their families who want those sort of options have those available. There's been some work this year on having a consistent after-school program at all three schools. And right now there is a consistent after-school program at Crocker Farm and at Wildwood. The Fort River has not yet been brought into that. So LSSE is running programs out of Crocker Farm and out of Wildwood, but is not yet running out of Fort River. And my understanding from Superintendent Garrick is that as of next year, LSSE will be offering the after-school program at Fort River as well, and that would provide some kind of continuity in terms of kids at all of the after-school programs having the same opportunities.
Have we reached the parents who were concerned with the changes? Are they feeling that we're putting into place a program which is comparable to what they had before?
I have personally reached out to every parent who contacted me last fall expressing concern about the redistricting. So that was actually my New Year's resolution. So in the first week of January, I sent out a bunch of emails, how are you feeling, how are you feeling? And with one exception, there's one parent who emailed me and said that his daughter has struggled and sort of described some situations that she'd gone through that were difficult. Every other parent emailed me and appreciated my email, but said, it's been great, and we love, this principal, and we love this school, and we feel very supported. And I think it's important to remember that there was a lot of effort last year. The lines were voted in October. The new boundaries were voted in October. There were new open houses in the spring at all of the schools, so children could go and meet the staff and meet the principal, the teachers, et cetera. We also, of course, had the principal from Marks Meadow move and become the principal of Wildwood. So that was able to provide continuity since all of the families who were at Marks Meadow in terms of their boundaries moved, in fact, to Wildwood. So there was that continuity in terms of the same principal. So is redistricting hard? It's always hard. Somebody a couple years ago, actually, a superintendent candidate, the last time we did the search, said to the school committee, the three hardest things school committees do are closing schools, redistricting, and hiring a superintendent. And in the 3 years
You
I've been
struck
on,
out.
yeah, I mean, I sort of was like, is there anything else that could go wrong? I mean, so, and that's what he said. I mean, he said, you know, those are the three things that are always controversial, that are always difficult, and that school committees always take heat over. And so,
And that's what
you know,
school committees are for.
And
That's
is
their
yeah.
main function, to provide the leadership and the resources. In this final moment, what words of advice can you give your colleagues and the next representative from in your seat?
So I guess my hope is that in the future, the Amherst Regional School Committee will just keep a strong focus on the kids and what's best for the kids. I think that the kids are the reason we do this, and I'm a strong believer in public education. And I think sometimes the kids, frankly, get kind of lost because the kids are almost voiceless, and it's very easy to hear the voices of adults in the community. And I believe I've tried to keep my focus throughout the time I've been on the kids and are we meeting their needs? And I hope that all members of the school committee can keep that focus.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I look forward to working with you.
As do I. Take care.
Well, that's it for tonight. Next week I'll have Catherine Appy, who is the other candidate,
the only
the
candidate.
sole candidate. And I'll have a lot of questions about all of the challenges before her. Until then, keep watching ACTV. This is Conversations. Thanks to all the students who are helping us every week and the staff as well. Good night.